Hi, my name is Matt and I'm going to walk you through how to make this end grain basket weave cutting board. The tools I use to design might seem a little unconventional. To help me wrap my head around more complex patterns, I use Excel. I resize the cells into squares and use different colors and border lines to create my patterns. Then I'll assign a unit of measurement to each cell and do the math from there to figure out my cuts. This here is a rough draft of the spreadsheet for the basket weave pattern. As it became more popular, I got requests to make it in different sizes. To help repeat patterns like this without having to math, I create spreadsheets like this one. This allows me to enter in one dimension and the formula figures out the rest of the dimensions for me. For designs like this that require a panel with multiple cuts and glue-ups, I include kerf waste into the equation to help minimize waste. The advantage to the method that I'm showing you is that you can use any thickness lumber you have on hand. It doesn't matter if it's 1/2 inch scrap or it's 12-quarter timber. As long as you can cut accurately and plane it, it'll work. When I drew this pattern up, I wanted the option to choose between 2 or 3 species. The board I'm making here calls for 2, and I'm using sapele and cherry. And as you can see here, this piece of cherry has cut a pretty healthy twist, so I'll have to do something about that. What I'm about to do here is dangerous. I know this, and it's a risk I'm willing to take. If you are not comfortable removing safety features from your equipment, there are ways to work around this step, but I do not recommend ripping a piece of wood as twisted as this piece of cherry on the table saw. Use a band saw, or a hand saw, or any other saw. Cutting twisted wood on a table saw is a recipe for a kickback, even with safety features.
I'm in danger!
So my jointer is only 6 inches, but my lumber is wider. In order to joint wood wider than 6 inches, I'm going to start by removing the guard. And stop. What I'm doing is creating a rabbit edge in the wood you can see highlighted here. Be sure you're cutting deep enough to only require a single pass to flatten the 6-inch portion of your board. Alright, there are a few ways to do this, but I have a 6-inch wide piece of plywood that I know is flat with a small fence attached to the end. I apply double-sided tape to the flat portion of the freshly jointed wood, and I attach the two pieces together with the edge of the plywood resting firmly against that rabbet. Now, when I flip it over, there is a stable, flat reference face to run through the planer. With your plywood safely attached, you can start taking light passes until the top face of your board is completely flat. It's a good idea to use the pencil method to make sure you aren't overlooking any low spots, especially with a lighter colored wood. So for this size board, I'll be cutting about 7 pieces of cherry and 3 pieces of sapele at about 75 millimeters to make up the larger panels. I'm also cutting 5 pieces of cherry at about 19 millimeters. If you have access to panel clamps, I highly recommend them, especially on the thinner panels. I bought these Woodpecker's Clampzilla Juniors as a one-time tool after drinking too much bourbon, but they really are amazing. I have a few sets of the DIY clamps available on Amazon too that I really do like. After pulling these out of the clamps, take a little time to clean up the glue to get a flat a surface as you can on one side that you can use as a reference edge in the planer. I like to plane one side flat so I have a flat surface for the table saw. I'm starting by cutting this panel of sapele into 6 millimeter strips. These will be planed down to their final dimension of 4 millimeters. Now this panel of cherry, I'm going to cut this down into about 35 millimeter strips. These will be planed down to 32 millimeters. And for this last panel of cherry, I'll take this down to about 19 millimeters so I can plane this square into 16 by 16 millimeters. And this is what we're left with after the table saw. We'll go ahead and plane the larger cherry pieces down to 32 millimeters and the sapele pieces down to 4 millimeters, but leave the height alone. We'll take that down to the final dimension after the next glue up. The smaller cherry pieces, you can go ahead and take those down to 16 by 16 millimeters right now. So, once you're done planing, organize your pieces into a cherry wood sandwich using the thin sapele strips as the bread. You'll have a few extra pieces of the thin strips in case you run into any problems with voids in the wood or excessive snipe on a few pieces. To help you glue all of these up at once without using 1,000 clamps, use some painter's tape on one side of your sandwich to keep it from sticking to the one next to it. I made these cauls out of some inexpensive 1x1 steel tubing. I cut out a notch in the end to fit a basic F-clamp. It's not 100% necessary to cut out the notch, but it makes it a lot less unwieldy when you're getting them set up. And once it's in place underneath the panel, put another one on top and use the clamp to get it set into place before using a second clamp on the far side to ensure the panel stays flat during your glue up. You can buy this in 8-foot lengths for really cheap and cut them whatever size you need. I like them better than wood cauls because the glue cleans up easier, they're super stiff for their size, and they store a lot easier. Before you run these through the planer, be sure to clean up excess glue from one side so you have a flat edge on the planer bed. Take really light passes on both sides. Use your calipers often while working your way down to the final dimension. Okay, this step is critical. Set your pieces up like this and confirm the top edge is completely flush. If not, you're going to have compounding gaps in your final glue up. Now you're going to cut all of your pieces into the desired board thickness. I'm cutting just a little bit more than 2 inches so I can surface the board down to 2 inches once it's complete. This is a really basic jig that I built for these glue ups. For the method that I use, the important things to note is that the fences are dead square and that they're just shorter than the board is thick. This is what your dry fit should look like in your jig. You'll be cutting off the ends after the glue dries, but using the small squares as spacers against the fence is important to ensure even clamping pressure. Once I have the fences in place, I take the on-center measurements between the fences. I'll take that measurement and cut a piece of scrap plywood I can put on top for downward pressure to keep the glue up completely flat. This glue up can seem a little intimidating, but if you set up properly and make a few dry runs, it's not that bad. I set all my pieces up in groups, 7 of the large blocks, 8 of the small. That's how many are used in each vertical column. Only apply glue to the edge faces of the larger blocks. This will save time and it will make sure you have contact with every piece of wood. Lastly, make sure you're using Titebond 3. Not only for the higher waterproof rating, but for the longer open time you're going to need to get all the pieces set. So my clamping method is a workaround for me being too cheap to buy a nice set of parallel clamps. I put the plywood on top of the board and drive a screw through and into the fixed top and side fences. I place my vertical clamps and then I tighten them up. After I'm done tightening, I drive screws through the ply and into the bottom fence. This helps maintain some vertical pressure while I remove the clamps and place them horizontally across the board. I go through the same steps in this direction while I tighten everything snug. Because my fences were attached to the base with L brackets, I can unscrew them from the base and gently flip the board and the fences together along with the clamps. Now I can attach clamps running the other direction and I can have even clamping pressure all around the board. Before surfacing, I'll cut off the extra material around the perimeter. I won't take it down to its final size until afterwards in case of any tear out around the edges. Because I don't have a reliable drum sander, and I won't put an end grain board like this one through the planer, a CNC is my best option to get this dead flat. I've done this in the past with a hand sander, but sanding end grain takes forever. A drum sander or a router sled are both other great options. I soak the board in mineral oil for about an hour and let it drip dry on a wire rack overnight. I give the board a healthy coat of board conditioner that I make. I leave that on for about an hour before buffing it smooth. And that is that. If you are interested in a copy of the full walkthrough and spreadsheet cut calculators, I'll leave a link to my website in the description. Feel free to reach out directly or in the comments if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.